What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the patch highlights for patch 1.4 for Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, which just yesterday got its big release of Lex Imperialis. And while I covered that DLC separately via a DLC review, at the time I made that video I did not actually have access to the full patch notes for the base game that was dropping alongside the paid DLC. So I wanted to take a minute and kind of talk about the stuff that everybody gets for free, because again, it is not part of the DLC. Especially since I thought there were a few interesting things in there worth talking about. That said though, if you are specifically looking for the DLC, that video went up yesterday, you can check it out and hear all about the actual paid stuff, which is naturally the sort of big highlight of the release. But with that said, let's actually dive into it. So first up, and probably the thing you'll easily notice the most, is that shields were added to the game alongside shotguns being overhauled. So shields, available for everyone, offer a new way to mitigate damage primarily via its block chance. They didn't just stop there, of course, they also added a suite of talents to support that playstyle alongside, of course, all sorts of various types of shields with different effects that lean themselves to a whole bunch of build crafting, making sure that Abelard is tankier than ever. Shotguns also saw a bit of an overhaul. For starters, just across the board, all of them pretty much use just one action point to fire now. Beyond that, there's just a ton of much better variety and of course talents and things to support it. The Arbitrator from the DLC has a bunch of talents that specifically lean into shotguns, and they'll be able to do a little more with them. But everybody will of course benefit from the fact that there are just more interesting shotguns in the game now, as prior to this, at least in my opinion, they were a little sparse in terms of interesting ones. Now you're practically tripping over ones with interesting effects, but I will say it really does seem like Arbitrator gets the best selection here just because of their innate abilities. However, everybody who can use them will of course benefit from these revamped versions and can make use of all these new items. And speaking of new items, it's probably worth a mention that because of the addition of shields and shotguns, as well as all the DLC content, there were a host of new items added to the game. The bulk of them, of course, being the shields and the shotguns. But even beyond that, if you find yourself at the end of the game, you may want to go peruse the merchant inventories, because we even see some stuff having been added there. So regardless of whether or not you own the DLC, you may very well find some new ways to play the game anyway. Now this patch is also said to have brought a bunch of fixes to the co-op gameplay. That said, I'm more of a single player guy, and honestly I forget this game has multiplayer half the time, so I'm probably not the best person to ask about how effective those fixes have been, but realistically the game should be a little smoother, at least for the people choosing to play in co-op, but I suppose time will tell on that one, which is probably as good a place as any to then mention that as far as bugs and overall patch stability, at least for me, things have seemed fine. In fact, most of the reports I've seen about people having trouble with the DLC and the patch and everything are people who have been using mods. Toy Box is always a popular one, and then of course the update breaks all that stuff, which can lead to a cascade of problems. And quite frankly, how well the game runs with it having been modded is just not really the developer's problem, and so do keep in mind at the very least you need to update your mods. But I would be curious to hear how this is running for everyone who is of course not using the mods, because as far as the fixes that were part of this patch specifically, most of them seem to revolve around people skipping cutscenes, which would then break something. They fixed a lot of that stuff where now you can skip cutscenes galore and theoretically things should be okay afterwards, although it did sound like a fair few of these were fringe cases anyways. Alongside all of that stuff, we also have a host of visual and audio, I guess fixes would be the word, but in some cases, especially for the audio, things were just added. They added a whole bunch of sound effects to a wide variety of stuff. Everything from just mousing over things in a menu to slightly more important stuff. So certainly a welcome change, but admittedly kind of an odd one given how far we are removed from the actual release, at least to me anyways, I guess. And then the visual side of that was mostly just things you would expect, just touching up animations, fixing camera angles, things like that. And probably one of the more notable visual changes you'll see is that the Adeptus Arbites have been added to the initial planet Rykad Minoris, regardless of whether or not you have the DLC. So those are some encounters you will be able to see and experience regardless of whether or not you have it activated or anything like that. It's just part of the base game now. Now, in their various updates to mechanics in this patch, I did notice a couple oddities in there as well. For starters, Damage over time effects will no longer be affected by difficulty scaling, which I would assume is probably something to do with the Executioner archetype, but I'm not exactly sure what their intended effect there is. Although much in that same vein, difficulty scaling will also no longer affect skill checks for abilities and items. So if you perform a skill check that is associated with an item or an ability, that is a flat check that isn't affected by difficulty anymore. Another thing I also saw that they fixed is the Vanguard archetype's Heroic Act had trouble targeting enemies, like, it would path wrong sometimes, as an example, and thus you wouldn't reach the target and it would wind up doing nothing. They were trying to fix a lot of instances of that happening, which is one of the reasons they targeted things like updated pathfinding and stuff like that across the board for the base game as well. Most everything else of note in the patch just seemed to be various fixes and changes to a wide variety of items alongside some UI stuff. For instance, there were planets that wouldn't display properly in the galaxy map when you mouse over things. They fixed a lot of that stuff, changed some values on a variety of items, in some cases making sure they actually provided the benefit they were meant to, in others making sure it wasn't exploitable outside of what was intended anyway. For instance, it was possible to use the cultist hood to just infinitely trigger ignite, which is something they've been trying to get away with, just those infinite never-ending turns, which seems to have been the main focus of much of their balance passes previously. So we kind of see at least some of that continued here in some of these changes. But that is by far and away the bulk of what was going on here. So overall, just even outside of the DLC, I think there was a host of really good stuff done here and a lot of changes to the base game that I think were definitely worthwhile and improved the experience for everyone. And what's more, if you didn't know, they've already mentioned that patch 1.5 should be coming sometime between now and the end of the year, so probably like fall, winter, give or take. And that's before, of course, we get the further updates alongside the already planned future 2 DLCs that are both slated for 2026. So even outside of this stuff, Rogue Trader apparently still has plenty of life left in it, and I will of course be covering that all along the way. So hopefully you found all that enjoyable, and if you did, or you're looking forward to hearing more about this one, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.